This week, we are discussing Chasing the Night Skies with David Behrens. You are listening to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. This week, I am joined by David Behrens. We're going to be discussing astrophotography here in the Great Lakes, some of the different techniques, approaches, and all the fun things that come with it. David, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. I'm truly honored to be here.
I'm happy to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Like you said, my name is David Behrens. I'm born and raised in West Michigan. This is my home. I live actually between Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan. So if you can kind of picture right in the middle of that, that's where I live. So, and I've lived in this area my whole life. So sheltered West Michigan, I'm the poster child for that, I guess.
A lifelong Michigander.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. And as far as photography, I was introduced to photography at really a kind of a young age. You know, my parents had cameras, Kodak Brownies, that kind of stuff. Christmas time, I got a Kodak Instamatic, and this is before your time, but back in the day, they used to there was a company that had a film subscription that would send you like 126 Instamatic film in the mail. You'd go out and take your pictures, send it in to them. Their hook was, we're giving you free film, you just pay for the developing, that kind of thing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I was a kid, and and I was very inquisitive and had to figure out how things worked and everything. So I was interested in photography, and I just took pictures of friends on bikes and, it's just joking around, Instamatic stuff, family get-togethers, that kind of thing. So that kind of sparked my early interest. I had an uncle, his name was Bob, and he had the first SLR that I ever saw or put my hands on. That was, he had a Minolta SRT 101, and back in the day, it was completely manual, so we would go over to my uncle's house, and he took the time to explain, film speed, aperture, shutter speed, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, kind of like an early mentor.
Exactly. So who knows if it wasn't maybe for my Uncle Bob taking that time early in my life, would I have been exposed to it maybe later? I don't know, but I was very thankful that he took the time and did that for me. So.
Yeah, a great introduction to photography, especially with a family member, because that's how I got started too. My dad was big into photography, and at first I got I think it was a Polaroid iZone instant camera or something, kind of similar in a way, but it came with like 12 shots to a roll, and I would do the same thing. I'd take goofy little pictures of whatever, and then when I got older, my dad was like, "Okay, you actually like photography. I'm going to, kind of teach you a little bit more about it here." It was the same thing. He let me start using his camera, and he taught me, the same thing too, about this is shutter speed, this is aperture, this is how you control depth of field, this is, all the different aspects that make an image, and that seed was planted just like Uncle Bob. So
yeah,
that's awesome. So you've been doing this basically your whole life then.
Yeah. I think back, my high school had a camera club. Sadly, I didn't get in it, but they had a week. It was called SAC Week. And they had it was like a career kind of thing. and I got into the photography end of the high school SAC week thing. And so I was introduced to the dark room and going out and shooting pictures of students and all of that kind of stuff. So then I got to put some of that knowledge from my Uncle Bob to work, taking pictures of students and stuff like that. So, and yeah, I'll never forget that week. It was just like, it's like a plant. You plant that seed, and then you got to water it a little bit, and then give it some sunshine, and then it starts to sprout. So it wasn't until after I graduated high school. I was I think a year out of high school when I bought my first camera, and that was a Minolta XG7. It was a aperture priority camera. It wasn't top of the line, but I felt like a king.
Oh yeah, your first camera.
I'm a photographer now.
Yeah, you've got the real deal in your hands now.
Yeah. Look out, world! Here I come. So, my photographs were awful, but I was having fun with it. It was just like the world came alive. I'm starting to record stuff. It's just like, man, this is so cool. So yeah, it was like I bought a Minolta because, first of all, that was the brand that my uncle had. So it was like I got a allegiance there. It's
that connection.
Yeah. So and this was way before the internet, YouTube, and all that kind of stuff. So if you wanted to learn anything photography, you either had to be reading magazines, books. I was back and forth to the library getting books and sending away for books and magazines. I was just like voracious, it was just like, I just want to read everything there is to know about photography. So
yeah, you just wanted to learn and grow and absorb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like a lifestyle, it's just like it gets a hold of you. If it's something that is in your wheelhouse, with your giftings or with your talents or whatever it is, if it's in your wheelhouse, you just run with it. It's like, this is what I was meant to do. And that's what it feels like.
Exactly. That's 100% accurate. And I feel like it's similar for a lot of us as photographers in our early beginnings. And as we progress through the years of doing it, it's natural. It doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like an obligation because you're passionate about it. And it's like anything in life. If you're passionate about it, you'll find a way. It'll always be just fun for you. And you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to absorb that information, whether it be through reading, practicing, even shooting with other photographers. I've learned so many things over the years just from shooting with other photographers and seeing how they approach a scene, or maybe they're using a specific type of filter, whatever the case might be. There's so many different ways to learn. But yes, to your point, today it's quite a bit easier with social media, YouTube. There's thousands, millions of blogs out there with information. I actually kind of feel like sometimes that can actually be a little bit overwhelming with the amount of information that's actually out there.
Yeah, it's like there's so many voices, and when you're starting, it's like, who do you listen to?
Right.
Where do you go?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Who's the right voice in the darkness here? Right.
Yeah. And soon after I started in photography, I got a hold of a book, and the title was Photography for the Joy of It. And the author's name was Freeman Patterson. And you can still find it like on eBay for like $4 or $5. It's an easy read, a lot of photographs in it, but it breaks it it breaks photography down into kind of like, this is a joy in life. This is something you get to do. It's not something you have to do like a job or, whatever. You get to do it. It'll bring you joy, and, he talks about bringing his camera to work and, and all this kind of stuff, and having your camera with you at all times, and my goodness, that book really spoke to me. It was like, I'm always looking for a shot. If I'm driving, my wife will tell you that when I drive the car, I'm not looking at the road. I'm looking for stuff to photograph. Sometimes, we got to kind of rub the fingernail marks out of the dashboard from where she's hanging on. No, I'm kidding. But,
buckle up. We're going down this 2-track over here.
Hang on, dear. Hang on. Here we go. So, but I'm, you get into this photography, and then it's like, if it's in your blood, it's like, no matter where you go, you're looking at a scene and you're thinking, I wonder what that would look like at sunset. I wonder what that would look like at sunrise, with the sun just starting to creep into the top of that scene, so.
Yeah, it grows on you. It's like, it becomes an extension of who you are. You're where somebody might just see a tree or a building or whatever the case might be. You see light, you see a subject, you see a scene coming together in this perfect symphony of all these different elements, and everybody else is just kind of meandering by it like, cool. Yeah, it's nice. But then there's that photographic vision that I've talked about it on the show before, and I'm sure all photographers are familiar. You develop that photographic vision and you just start seeing it everywhere in everything.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. There's sometimes I'll laugh if I'm out photographing, let's say in Grand Haven, nice beautiful sunset, and in the state park there's all these cars. People are sitting waiting for the sunset, and just as it's starting to come down, just about to touch the water, all these people come rushing out of their cars with their cameras, their phones and everything, their iPads, snap, 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 snap. That sun goes below the horizon and everybody leaves. Like, oh, show's over. And it's like, wait a minute, this is when it just starts getting good.
Yep, that's when that soft light shows up.
Yeah, that's when the best light is. There's still light. You can capture 45 minutes, an hour after sunset, and all these people have gone home, and it's just like, oh, good, I have this place all to myself now.
Yep, that's one thing. I've talked about it on some previous episodes too. I'm always, especially in fall, I'm always the first one when I do go to the overlook at the Porcupine Mountains, or really anywhere. I'm always the first one at the location that I'm going to be shooting at. And I'm usually there like 2 hours before sunrise. And people that have shot with me in the past, they're like, why do you get up so early to go do this stuff? And I've told people the same thing. The best light is going to happen in that 2-hour window before sunrise and that 2-hour window after sunset. It's when you're going to get those real soft hues. You're going to get that real soft light. You're going to catch the color in the sky. Sometimes you can catch really nice gradients. It's when the show begins, like you said.
Yeah, it's fascinating that, you see the colors of the sunset and it's like, oh, that's beautiful. But then the light dims and the colors are more saturated. It's like they get richer and richer and richer. And it's like, why would you want to miss that,
Right. Why are you leaving so early? And, I'm equally guilty as charged. When I first got into photography, I'd show up 15 minutes to sunrise and I'd, get all set up and be like, all right, well, I'm here. Or even for sunset, 15, 20 minutes to sunset. I'd shoot the sunset, throw my gear in the bag, get back in the car, and head out. And it wasn't until, it took me probably a couple of years, really, to kind of put the pieces together that, hey, there's something really special about the light after sunrise or after sunset and before sunrise. And it was kind of learned through, I wouldn't call it an error, but through being late to, get to a location for sunset and saying, you know what, I'm going to shoot it anyways. Sun's down, whatever, who cares? I'm still going to shoot it. And then you get back home, you look at the image, and you're like, the characteristics, the quality of this light is substantially better than what I typically get at any other time of the day. And, it's one thing that I've always reiterated to everybody that I meet, all the photographers that I speak with and that I meet out on the trails and whatnot. Whenever people ask me like, hey, what's your one piece of advice? I always say, show up early, stay late, because that's where the magic of photography, the magic of light lives,
So true. And you talk about Porcupine Mountains. And I was shooting one time with Walter Elliott, and we were up by Log Slide Overlook, kind of up by in the Munising area. And the sun's going down and shooting some afterglow. And, I'm always one that just wants to stay a little bit longer. And he says, I'm going back to the car. I don't want to walk in the dark. He says, throw me the keys. So I give him my car keys. And he says, I'm not coming back for you. I'm not coming back out here in the dark. Because he says, there's, cougars, there's wolves, there's, whatever. He says, I'm not coming back for you, So I stay and I'm shooting longer. And, I love shooting long, especially like if there's clouds and there's movement and you get where the sky is just smeared with colors. And, it's just, that's where I live. That's what I really like, but I'll tell you that walk back in the dark on that trail to the car, it was like, I hope there's no coyotes out here. I hope there's no wolves. So, but he was serious. He says, I'm not coming back for you.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, at least he was upfront with you about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Honesty is the best policy, right?
Yep. I don't blame you. I have made some decisions in the past where I've been a couple miles into the Porkies or really anywhere here in the Great Lakes, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I've stayed out late in some areas just being so focused on the photography that I'm not even really paying attention to the time. And then it finally kind of hits you. You're like, oh man, it's an hour and a half after sunset. The interior of the forest is going to be really, really dark. I should probably go back. And then even with a handheld flashlight, a headlamp, I've got no shame in admitting I get scared from time to time walking through the dark. You hear something go, creak in the forest and you're like, what was that? You're just like, please don't be a bear or, a cougar or any of these other wild animals that are out here.
Yeah, it's I've had that before with storms, shooting lightning. Really, you got to put yourself in the path of the storm, And I was shooting one time in Holland, and the storm was coming in, and I'm facing the big red lighthouse, and I'm towards Chicago, and the storm was coming out of Chicago. And you wait for it, and you wait for it, and you wait for it. Here it comes, And okay, now there's some strikes. Okay, now I can start shooting. And the storm is just barreling in. Okay, one more. This is it. This is my last shot. I promise this. I'm talking to myself. This is it. Okay, one more. Okay, one more. Well, then the lightning is like behind you. And it's like, I am in the wrong place at the wrong time, and cover my camera and run to the car. And it wasn't a short run, but I'll tell you, when there's lightning, it'll make you run a little bit faster.
I've had that same thought before, where you've got your tripod in your hand and your camera's attached to the top of it. It's got a rain cover on it or whatever. And you're trying to hustle away from a storm, and you're just thinking to yourself, I've got a giant lightning rod in my hand. Like, this is this is not anything
is not good.
Reasonable. Yeah, not a situation a reasonable individual would put themselves in. But you kind of have to have that that ability to push yourself to really get those unique shots, like lightning, or staying out late in the darkness, that kind of stuff, because that's where the best shots, really, in my experience anyways, that's where the best shots exist, is those moments where you're a little unsure about what you're doing, but you're confident in your ability to do it anyways.
Yep. And I find too, like, the weather in the margins, where the weather's like at the worst, sometimes the light is the best. You'll get certain seasons, like when it's not quite, winter's not quite over, but it's not quite spring. You'll get these storms, and it's like magic light. That's what you're looking for. That's what you want. That's why we do this.
Exactly. It's why we're out there. We're passionate about what we're doing. We're wanting to be present in these fleeting moments that define our adventures. We're wanting to share those moments, and that's where those incredible images live, is bad conditions, unique conditions. It's easy to be a photographer on a perfect 70-degree, sunny, partly cloudy day. It's shooting fish in a barrel. But when it's one of those moments where you've got gale warnings and severe thunderstorms blowing in, or unique conditions, that's where you're going to find that really cool, dramatic image that we all want to create. We all want that drama in our images, you know?
And don't you find it's the most rewarding as a photographer when you capture those moments? I say capture, but when you record those moments, it's like they can't be repeated. It's like, this is a once in a lifetime kind of thing.
Yep. And that's really a great segue into the topic of astrophotography, because a part of being human is naturally to maybe not necessarily be afraid of the dark, but you're definitely more alert. You're more aware of what's going on and what's going on around you. And I'll never forget, it was, I want to say, either 2020 or 2021. I realized that the Milky Way was going to line up over the Presque Isle River in the Porcupine Mountains. And I drove up there. It was a Friday afternoon. And it was the first time I was going to stay out there real late into the evening to shoot the Milky Way. And I got all set up, got everything ready. And I shot out there till probably 3 a.m. It was so dark when I finally started packing up. And I kind of got into my head about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I got to hike back out. It's really dark. This is just wild. What am I even doing out here? And I turned on my cell phone light. I turned on my handheld flashlight. I had my headlamp going. Basically, every light that I owned was active as I'm trying to hike out of the darkness. And I made it to the parking lot, put all my stuff in the car, and I'll never forget that feeling of, it was euphoria. I had accomplished something that it was somewhat out of my comfort zone at the time, but now I still get that little rush when, you go to a place that you're going to shoot under the night sky, or you're going to do a really long hike into the interior or what have you. You're going to stay out late in the darkness. And then when you make it back to the car, kind of give yourself that little pat on the back. You're like, hey, you know what? I faced this. I did this. And look at the resulting image. Look at what I created as a result of doing that.
Yeah, there's a real sense of pride.
Mm-hmm.
And, the interesting thing is two-dimensional images in photography, as well as like music. When you experience it, it can instantly bring back those feelings that you had at that time. Now, not all of your viewers are maybe going to feel what you felt when you got back to your car, but they're going to say, "Wow, that's an awesome image." You're going to look at that and say, "Holy cow, that was a pinnacle. That was a mountaintop deal. That was a game changer for me."
Yeah, and it's those memories that tie into those images for me as well, that it makes them that much more special, because it's not just an image. It's an experience, and there's a story behind that experience that you can now share through that image. You can now tell people, hey, I hiked 2 miles, set up, hung out for 4 or 5 hours, whatever it was, waited under pitch black skies for the Milky Way to be in just the right spot. I shot this image and I brought it back, and I did it all under the cover of darkness. I did it all not 100% certain if it maybe was the best, it maybe safest decision, but I did it and I achieved it. And this is what I have to show for it. And I really like how you brought up that you have that experience too. I think it's a mutually shared experience amongst photographers, where when we put our minds to something and we finally achieve that, it's just such an overwhelming sense of pride. And for a lot of us, going back, toward astrophotography, or for a lot of us going into astrophotography, it's a challenge because there's so much popularity with it now. A lot of people want to shoot the Milky Way, the Northern Lights, the star-filled skies of Michigan and beyond. And I think that for many of us, that first image that you capture of the Milky Way or of the Northern Lights, something to that effect, it holds that same value. You never forget your first successful Milky Way image or Northern Lights image, because it's that experience and that euphoria of, hey, I did this. I accomplished this. Look at how great this image is.
Yeah, and I find that shooting like Aurora Borealis, you can explain it to people. You can show them a photograph, and then it's like it becomes alive. I can tell you about it all day long, but if I can show you, it's a whole different thing. And they're like, "Oh, wow. Is that going to happen again tomorrow night? Can I go out with my cell phone and can I?" Well, it doesn't happen like that. But if you watch the internet, and conditions are just right, you go out and you hope for the best. And there's been times where you think, oh, the KP index is up there. It looks like tonight could be a very good night. And so you drive out to your location, you set up, and you wait, and it just doesn't materialize for whatever reason. But on those nights when it does happen, you forget all the other ones. You forget all those times you stood out there, and your back stiff and, and you're carrying all your gear, and cold, it might be cold out or whatever. When it happens, it's just like the skies come alive and you think, oh, it's like, this is just for me. The universe is putting on this display for me, and I'm fortunate enough here that I can take images of it and bring it back and show people.
Exactly. One of the things that I really liked that you mentioned there was all the attempts that didn't work out. It only takes that one attempt that does work out to make every other poor experience just disappear, fades away, just afterthought. And in that moment, you are so excited, so just enthralled with what's happening before you. And it makes those attempts that didn't work out that much more worth it. And it makes that time, that dedication, that effort put forth that much more worth it. Because even on nights where maybe the Aurora Borealis isn't active, I'll usually shoot the Milky Way. If it's winter, I'll shoot the winter Milky Way. There's so many other different things that you can still do out there to practice astrophotography or just getting accustomed to shooting images at night, that really there's no way to, for lack of a better term, fail at an astrophotography trip. You can do moonlit landscapes. That's one thing that I love to do is, if there's a crescent moon or, full moon even, that casts good amount of light on the landscape, and you can, with the right exposure time, you can actually make it look almost like daytime, but there's stars in the sky. Or you can just do pure starscapes where maybe you're, at a lighthouse or Silver Lake, you're in the sand dunes and you just want to shoot a nice dune leading line up into a star-filled sky. You can do that. There's so many options. And if the northern lights do materialize, awesome. You can combine those different elements to make a more powerful image. Or if the Milky Way does rise, or it's clear enough to see it, you can include that too. But one of the things that I've always done with astrophotography, or just night photography sessions in general, has always been to go out with the intention of, I'm just capturing the stars. That's it. Whatever other opportunities present themselves, I'll take advantage of it if it happens. But, especially with the Aurora Borealis, because that's, you really can't plan that out more than a couple days in advance. With the Milky Way, with starscapes, with the moon phases, that can be planned. Just get out there and practice under those conditions. And then when the time's right, you'll already know what to do. You'll know what settings you should be at. You'll have a better understanding of what you need to be doing in those moments.
Yeah, I like your take on that. That it's probably it's better for photographers to go out with zero expectations, because I think that can kind of be a pitfall, that you expect you're going to get this brilliant Aurora Borealis, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and you could quickly get discouraged and say, I'm not going to do that again. I'll go shoot the Milky Way, but I'm not going to do Aurora. Is just too iffy, or whatever it may be, or I didn't capture that just right. And too easily you could get down on yourself, or, just saying, yeah, that's not for me. But I was shooting with 3 other photographers one time, and we were up in the Silver Lake sand dunes. And our original shoot was going to be stars at night, but we got up there and sunset, and I was with a friend of mine, Jerry James, and we were way back in the dunes. And there's kind of like a little ghost forest there, trees that are half submerged in sand, and as the sand blows, some of them get uncovered, and it's kind of a cool area to be in at night. It can kind of be freaky sometimes, in the dark. But we were back there with the intention to shoot stars. Well, there was kind of like a thin layer that obscured the stars, and we were all the way back there, and it was like, oh man, no stars. And it's dark, and there was a faint glow on the horizon. And so I quick set up with my settings that I use typically for aurora, and it was just glowing greens and pinks. So I set up, there was this old dead tree snag that was just kind of, it wasn't quite vertical, but it was kind of leaning a little bit. And I used that as my foreground. And I got this brilliant aurora over it. And it was just like dumb luck, just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And it was just like one of the best feelings. There were clouds to the north. So those from Traverse City up to the UP, it was obscured. They didn't get any of it. We just happened to be at Silver Lake, and there was just enough opening, and for about 35, 40 minutes, had beautiful aurora, just a beautiful display. And it was just like, sometimes you get lucky. You're in the right place at the right time. And then the other part of that is, okay, I'm in the right place at the right time. I got to have the knowledge. I got to have the skill to come away with something.
Yep. You need to know how to take the image. Just, like my dad always used to say, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, but to capitalize on that luck, you've got to be good. So, that's something that I always try to remind myself of. Even if you go out to do astrophotography and what you may or may not have been looking for doesn't materialize, it just doesn't work out, just hang out, look around. There's always a shot somewhere, somehow, in something. And, very, very similar story to the first night I ever saw the Aurora Borealis myself. Well, I should say the first night I saw it in the Upper Peninsula, it was either 2021 or 2022. I was in Union Bay, and for whatever reason, I decided I'm going to walk out to the shoreline, and I'm just going to set up the camera. It was a little bit before midnight. I was like, I'm going to set up the camera, and I'm just going to see what's out there. And my wife and my son were with me. My second son hadn't been born yet, and they were sleeping back at camp. I just had this feeling like I need to go out there and just take an image, just what's out there. And I set the camera up. I took a test shot, and there was this really strange green glow in the sky. And I just glanced over to my left, and there was this white, it just looked like a really strange white cloud. And I was like, well, what's that? I turned the camera, take the image, and there was this giant green pillar off to my left. And it was just like, wow, that's the Northern Lights. That's it. And as I sat out there for a little bit and just kind of fooled around with different compositions and explored the area a little bit, different opportunities started presenting themselves. I noticed that the Milky Way was in the sky, so I tried to get an image of the Northern Lights with the Milky Way. I just was kind of going up and down the shoreline, just taking all these different images. And it was kind of that catalyst for that approach. It was like the culmination, the realization of just get out there and just do it. Just try, because you never know what opportunities are going to present themselves. And even if no opportunities present themselves, it's still great practice. It's still time behind the camera that's going to teach you what you need to do and how you need to do it when the time is right. And that's way more important than seeing it every time you go out. If you see it every time you go out, but you don't know how to capture it, it kind of nullifies itself at that point.
That's so true. You know, it's like that adage, practice makes perfect. You know, how many people think, you know, I should practice changing lenses in the dark. I should learn how to focus when it's blackout. You know, those kind of things that, you know, aren't even on your radar, but will pay dividends when you're out there and then the situation presents itself and then you're ready to roll.
Yeah. Understanding infinity focus and knowing exactly how to find it on your lens. One of the little tricks that I like to do actually is use a Batinov mask, which is a filter that you actually put over the front element of the lens, just like a neutral density or a circular polarizer. And what you do with it is, as you adjust your focus ring back and forth, there's 3 lines that the brightest stars will essentially create. And when all 3 lines intersect in a perfect, call it diamond shape, you know that your focus is pinpoint tack sharp on the stars. And for a long time, I used to just zoom in on the back screen of my camera and just zoom into a star and just kind of tweak it as best I could. But you know how it is with digital cameras. You introduce, as you zoom in more on the back of the screen, you get noise and artifacts, and it can be hard to make sure that you're actually focused on the star, or you have critical focus on the landscape. But that little Batinov mask, I'll put a link to it here in the show notes for everybody that's interested in it.
Yeah, I've never seen one, but I would be interested to see how that operates.
Yeah, it's a really, really cool little gadget, and you basically just put it right on the front of the lens, and as you adjust your focus back and forth, you'll line up all those lines, and as long as they're all lined up the right way, you'll have tack sharp stars, because, you know, we're usually, you should be shooting wide open on our lenses. So, you know, you're shooting at 2.8, 1.8, 1.4, 1.2, where your depth of field is razor thin and super easy to miss focus if you're not careful. And there's been images where, you know, I'll go out, I'll see the aurora borealis, I'll be all hyped up and so excited about it that I don't pay attention to it. And then you get back and you bring it up on the computer and it looked okay on the back of your camera. But then when you get back home, you look at the image and you think, man, not terrible, but it's not as in focus as it could be. And it's those learning moments. And even with exposure time too, where different focal ranges are going to have different associated exposure times. Whereas if you're shooting a 10-second exposure at 14 millimeters, you're good for the most part. But if you're shooting a 10-second exposure at 50 millimeters, well, you're going to start getting star trails and it's going to affect the image.
Yeah, that looks horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get home, you look at it and you're like, man, but, you know, what do I do? And it's how you learn.
I have this old school. It's a Nikon 35 millimeter 1.4. It's an AIS. It's back from my film days. And when I put that on my DSLR, when you throw the focus all the way to the infinity side, that's where it stops, and it's right at infinity. So that lens is that's like money. It doesn't matter how dark it is or whatever. When it comes to a stop on the infinity side, it's like tack sharp.
Yep.
I love that lens, and a lot of times too, if I switch to an autofocus lens, then I'll turn that off, and then I'll look at the focus in the index and I'll get it right kind of in the middle of the infinity mark. Sometimes it's pretty tough focusing in the dark, but I'd be interested to even try that, what you suggested.
Yeah, bringing up focusing and when you mentioned the autofocus lens, that's another big thing for those of you that are out there listening, or those of you with interest in astrophotography. Make sure that you turn autofocus off or turn back button focus on your camera body, because the last thing you want to do is spend 15 minutes trying to lock your focus in and then go to take an image. And if autofocus is on, the camera's going to try to focus again. It's not going to understand that you're looking at stars, that you're already focused on your intended subject, and it's going to autofocus and throw everything off. So I'm happy you brought that up, because that got me a few times.
Yep. There's no greater frustration than when you're ready to take a shot and you go to push that shutter button or that shutter release, and then you hear zzz, zzz, zzz,
Yep.
zzz, and your camera's trying to find focus, and it's like, oh no, I thought I had it set. Now I start all over at square one. So yeah, that kind of stuff can be very frustrating. But again, you learn by doing, and we can all say, oh, we've arrived, or we're pretty good at this. There's still mistakes to be made if you don't watch it, if you're not careful.
Many times, even now, I go out and I make simple mistakes. Sometimes I have my exposure set wrong. Sometimes I think I have infinity focus and I don't. Sometimes, you just bump something and you may not even realize that you do it. And then it throws everything off. But it's part of that process. One of the things that I picked up early on from an astrophotographer that I still shoot with to this day, he would take gaffer's tape. And once he got his focus set on his lens, he would take gaffer's tape and he would actually tape over, kind of wrap it around the focus ring, not to the point where he would move it, but, you put it on there and it just kind of locks that focus point. And it helped a lot. Back when I was using Nikon F bodies, now I use Nikon Z bodies, which they actually have an option built into them where when you turn it on, it can the camera will remember its last focus position.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And you can have it to where when you turn it on, it automatically goes to infinity focus. So those, little creature comforts are nice to have, but for those that may not have them or whatnot, using that little piece of gaffer's tape to just get your focus in and then lock that focus ring in place. It was such a wonderful little trick when I first started, because, you move positions, you pick your camera up, you're moving around, what have you. 100 things could bump it, a branch, your coat, your bag, whatever. And once you hit that focus ring, well, now you got to start all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can save yourself a little bit of time out there, especially when the conditions are they're good, that makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. I had a situation that was similar to that, shooting the eclipse a few years ago down in central Illinois. And I had my 200 to 500 millimeter Nikon on a tripod, my camera. And I had it pointed up at the sky, up at the sun, and getting ready to shoot. Okay, eclipse is coming. And just kept shooting. And what I didn't realize is that the zoom was slowly backing off.
Yeah, focus creep.
Focus creep from gravity. It just kept it coming back. And fortunately, my shots were all sharp. Just had to crop more. But that focus creep, it was kind of disappointing. So I learned that if you're going to shoot up at the stars like that with a long lens that is notorious for focus creep, is get one of those wristbands like Live Strong or whatever, and zoom out, and then put that around the barrel of the lens, and then it can't creep back. So
that's another way to do it. And that was something that I was going to mention too, is the more you pitch your camera upward at any angle other than horizontal, 0 degrees, the more you reach 90 degrees, the more you have to be mindful of that, especially if you're using specialized equipment, a star tracker, or, I've seen people out there who will attach their camera to a telescope or what have you. The lenses from gravity, especially if they have a large front element, they're heavy, they have an extending barrel that protrudes, they'll move over time. So using a wristband or gaffer's tape, that kind of thing, that helps to mitigate that a lot. And one thing that I actually started doing, because I just honestly got so frustrated with focus creep on different lenses, I started using primes, because it's like, well, if it's just 3 glass elements inside of this lens, what can move other than the focus ring? But I'm not going to go from 200 millimeters to 180 millimeters over the course of an hour of shooting and not realize it.
You learn those lessons the hard way sometimes.
Now, when you're out there and you're doing astrophotography, you're under the night sky, are you just taking single images? Are you stacking images? Or are you using a star tracker or any kind of specialized equipment like that?
I typically just camera on a tripod, and I'm taking single images.
I highly recommend that for most astrophotography applications, because I really went kind of headlong into it a few years ago, and I bought a Nikon Z6 II, and before I had even taken it out of the box, it was literally delivered. I took it out of the box, I put it in a different box, and I sent it out to LifePixel to have it astro modified. So it's hydrogen alpha modified. Basically, it makes it more sensitive to red light, the hydrogen emission nebula up in the night sky. I got it back, and I went out, bought a tracker, did all these things. And as much fun as it is to do astrophotography in that way, it's really complex. And there's a lot of different things that go into it. You need to know how to polar align the star tracker. You need to understand how to post-process hydrogen alpha modified images. You need to know how to do all these different things that, for most people, it's going to be overkill and not necessarily a requirement. But I've found that despite going that far with astrophotography, some of my all-time favorite astrophotography images are simply single shots, because you can just get in there, get set up, you capture that scene, and you move on. You don't have to sit there and, fuddle around with things and align a star tracker and get everything lined up. You just set your camera on the tripod, boom, boom, boom. Start shooting. Such an easier approach, and something that I encourage everybody to do, even if maybe you don't have a great interest in astrophotography. Just try it, because you never know. Like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, it could plant that seed, and then before you know it, you're out there every night trying different things, testing different things. And maybe you do want to take it that far, or maybe you want to just stick with one camera, one tripod, and go out under the night sky and see what you can find. But it's all a part of it.
Yeah. And I shot the Milky Way. Recently I shot in mirrors at Silver Lake, with the Milky Way over the lighthouse. And it was different each time. The first time I shot it, I shot multiple images, but I was wearing waders and I was out in the water because the lake level was higher at the time. So I was out in the water, and then I shot like, I don't know, 8 or 10 images, and then I stacked them in Photoshop. And it was good. I wasn't totally happy. Then more recently I went back, and then I did the same thing, but the lake level was lower, so I didn't have to be out in the water. I was at the water's edge, but you wait for the Milky Way to rise just above the lighthouse, and then you start your sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're shooting like, I don't know, 8-10 second images, and then I put them together. I put them together in a stack in Photoshop, and then the Milky Way had this nice arc, like right over the lighthouse. So it's just like, and that was an image that I had wanted for a long time. It's like, there's no greater satisfaction than, you have a shot you want to get, and then you finally, it's like, yeah, I achieved that. Okay.
Yep. And that's, I actually think I remember seeing that image of yours. I was amazed by it. And I've been meaning to actually get out there to shoot that area under the night sky. I'm hoping to do it this spring.
Mm-hmm.
Time will tell. But,
yeah.
To your point, yes, when you put an image together in your mind and you can actually bring it to life, like, you got to be careful, because you don't want to put these crazy expectations on something, but it's possible under the right conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And you go out there and you keep trying, and eventually you're going to get those conditions. Eventually you will get your shot. It's going to take some persistence, some gumption to pull it off. But it reminds me of an experience of, it was either 2017 or 2018. There's a lighthouse in Door County, Wisconsin, the Cana Island Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of it. Mm-hmm.
The lighthouse is on this small island that's, you can walk to it through the lake, depending on how deep the lake is at the time. At the time, the water levels were a bit higher, so it was probably 2, maybe 300 foot walk from the shoreline out to this island through about 2, maybe 3 feet of water. Now, in the daytime, you can just take a tractor across. They bring people to and from on a tractor for tours and whatnot. But I wanted to go out there at night. So I sent an email to the foundation and said, hey, could I go out here and do this? Would you be okay with that? They said, yeah, it's fine, but you assume the risk. And just to be safe, I let the Coast Guard know, hey, I'm going to go out here and do this. Is that cool with you guys? And they were like, yeah, that's fine. No big deal. Like, just be safe when you do it. So I went out, parked. I had a spotter on the shoreline. I walked out there and I thought it was like 2 or 3 feet of water, but the lake was higher at the time. It was close to 4 feet in some spots, but I made it across and I set up and I shot a few images and not even going to pretend like it wasn't a kind of a spooky experience. You're on this island all by yourself at, 1 a.m. It's dark. And here you are by yourself, just taking pictures of this lighthouse with the Milky Way and the stars. And as great of an experience as it was equally a little concerning, we'll say. And despite that, I took the images, I got back, I was all hyped up, ready to see them. And I'll never forget it. I got back to the hotel that I was staying at up there. I loaded them up onto the computer and I looked at them, and I think I did a 10 image stack, and I just quick stacked it all together, wanted to just get a rough idea. And it's one of my all-time favorite astro images, not only because I had envisioned it, I knew the potential and the conditions came together for me, but again, tying back into what you just said and kind of what we've talked about here throughout the episode, when you get that image that you've thought about, that you've put together and dreamt about for so long, when you finally get it and it's tangible, you can print it off, you can hold it in your hands, you can look at it. It's such a great feeling.
And I find too that the harder you work for an image, the more you appreciate it when you look at it. It's like, yeah, because you know what you went through to get it.
Right. Other people, they see it and they're like, oh yeah, that's beautiful. And it has always been one of my favorite things to answer questions about my images where people actually want to know the story. They want to know, hey, how did you do this? Or what led you to this location under these conditions to do XYZ? And I get a lot more of that with astrophotography images, I feel like. Is it similar for you?
Yeah. And what I find too is, like, every photographer has a story to tell. It's like the camera in your hand is telling a story. Every image that you take is telling a story. Not only about what you're photographing, but it says something about you as well. So those images that are harder to get, it kind of says, well, I'm a little more tenacious, or I'm willing to work a little bit harder. Not that others don't work hard, but that you're willing to put in whatever it takes to get the image. And that's where that reward comes in. Not maybe with all the likes and everything else. It's a self-gratifying, you know what? I set a goal. I wanted to get this shot under these conditions. I did it.
And that's one of the things I've always said about my images, and specifically about the ones that I had to work a little bit harder for, whether that's getting to the location or the logistics or editing conditions, all the different variables. The one thing that has always been kind of that constant piece of my work is I feel that photography is the outward expression of the emotions that I can't find words for. And for me, my astrophotography work is the pinnacle of that, because it puts life into perspective. You look up at the night sky, you see all these billions of stars in the sky, and you realize just how insignificant all the little things we let get to us truly are. Somebody cut you off in traffic. So what? Maybe Maybe you got to the store and you needed to get a gallon of milk and they were out. Well, that ruined my day. Is it really that big of a deal? All those little things that we get tripped up on. When you're out there under the night sky and you're looking at it and you're seeing just how incredible it is to just simply exist. It's so much more. And that's one of the things that I think really, truly drew me to astrophotography is it's that shift in your state of mind from all these things are bad or maybe you're going through a tough time, whatever the case might be. You get out there and you spend some time under that night sky. Things don't seem so bad anymore.
Yeah, the things that seem so significant become insignificant because you look up and it's just this vast space. Not only just this, space itself, but then, you think about how the universe works.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm just a small speck of sand on this rock traveling through space, and here I am. I'm taking it all in.
Yeah. You're out there and you're experiencing those things that not everybody gets to experience, whether it be through lack of interest or maybe they just don't live in a place that's dark enough or, it could be for many different reasons, but it's that experience, that emotional, personal experience. Like I liked what you said earlier about when you were standing there at Silver Lake and the aurora showed up and you felt like it was for you. And it's that feeling of you're out there, you're witnessing this, you're taking it in, you're experiencing it on an emotional level just as much as a physical one. And it does. In those instances, it feels like it's for you. It's that connection, that little piece of you that realizes, hey, we're all here. We're all doing the same thing. And it humbles you in a good way.
Exactly. Yeah. When you're seeing a strong display of aurora, there's such a large host of emotions that you feel. Like you want to do a backflip, it's like, man, this is just, I can't put all this into words. It can move you to tears. It's just like, this is so incredibly beautiful. I wish everybody could see this and experience it, and it's just that whole emotional gambit that you go through that it's just so incredible. And the thing is that if you don't seek it out, you're going to miss it. Aurora is something that you gotta actively chase if you want to get photographs of it. Now you can get lucky like I did at Silver Lake. That's that may happen, but most of the time you have to actively seek.
You have to be proactive with it.
Yeah. When is the best time to get out there and get in a place where you can set up and experience it, photograph it.
And then, going back to that piece of knowing how to photograph it. And, that's something that I wanted to expand on a little bit more here too, where the different techniques for different subjects while you're out there under the night sky, where maybe if you're shooting the aurora, a single image is going to work for that. You don't want to be trying to stack aurora shots because the aurora is moving. It's going to be different from frame to frame. It's not going to work as a stacked image. And for those of you listening that don't know what stacking is, it's basically taking a series of images and then doing exactly what it sounds like. You stack them on top of each other using different softwares. I'll put a few in the show notes below so that you guys can check them out if you're interested. But you take a series of exposures and you stack them together, and the software basically cancels out the rotation of the Earth in a way to where as the stars move through the sky, it's lining them up and blending them together in a way to where instead of taking one single 10-second exposure, you can take 10 10-second exposures, blend them all together, stack them, and then it equates to a 100-second exposure. So you can work with the signal. It's called the signal to noise ratio. And basically, you don't want to get too much noise in your image. You want to have that nice, crisp, clean, clear sky. And that's signal, the good data. That's what we want to keep. The noise is what we want to minimize. So in stacking, you can accomplish that. But knowing when to use these two different techniques is critical, where, like I mentioned, a single astro image of the Aurora Borealis, you're going to want to do single images. But if you want a really well-pronounced Milky Way, for instance, you'd want to do stacking. As far as the two different techniques go, which do you find yourself using most frequently, David?
Single images. But I'm not afraid to go and stack images. But typically, I'm more of a single image kind of shooter. But there was a recent Aurora display, and typically, when there's no moon, the display is usually more. It appears brighter because it doesn't get washed out by moonlight.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When you're looking for these things in the night sky, you don't want to be shooting under a full moon, and preferably no moon is ideal.
Right. Happened to be out shooting in Ludington, and strong display in front, looking north, lighthouse. But then over my left shoulder's this big old moon. And in between, we had a display. It's called Steve, where it's a phenomenon where it bends light rays, and it kind of looks like half like a waterfall. And so in between Aurora, Steve, and the moon, it's like all this light just is washed all the way across the sky. And it's like those kind of things are where that kind of tests you as a photographer. It's like, okay, now I got to kind of balance exposure, and maybe I want to experiment. Maybe I want to try like a 4-shot panel or something like that, So that's where you try to get a little creative, and it's tough when you're out there and there's some moonlight.
Yeah, it certainly can be complex and make it very difficult. But one thing that I've actually liked to do with moonlight is if you catch it at the right time, where, say, the galactic center of the Milky Way is going to rise at midnight and the moon is going to set at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever at night, you can actually set up your camera and take your foreground shots while the moon is up and use that moonlight to your advantage. And then don't move the camera, of course, but wait for the moon to set. And then when the Milky Way rises, you can then proceed with taking your Milky Way images and blend the two different exposures together, similar to like you would be doing with stacking images. But instead of stacking multiple star images on top of each other to cancel out the rotation of the Earth, now you're just blending a bright, well-lit foreground with the Milky Way, but the foreground is lit by the moon. You can use that to your advantage in some cases,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's kind of like blending the both of blending the best of both
right
together to create one image. Another technique I've used is light painting, and I was shooting the moonrise at the tulip gardens in Holland, Michigan, with the big Deswan windmill in the background, and all the tulips were in bloom. Now you can imagine a full moon coming up, and I shot it between the crosses of the windmill. And I did like about I figure I could get away with about 4 seconds before it starts to show detail of the moon is moving, and 2 to 4 seconds with the lens that I was shooting with. And I had a little handheld LED flashlight, and I fired my shutter and I just brushed it across the top of those tulips. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, how about if I brush it twice? So during the exposure, I go over, and I got this. Normally, the tulips, the light from the moon wasn't light enough to illuminate the tulips on their own. So rather than shoot 2 shots and everything, I did the light painting thing, and I like the way it turned out. Would I do it that way all the time? Not necessarily. But that's the beauty of photography. Sometimes there's more than one way to achieve the same thing.
exactly. And that's one thing that I've enjoyed as well, is doing different types of light painting with different subjects, with flowers, or there's a image I did star trails with, where there was a tree right down the road from a friend of mine's house, and I had driven past it 100 times, and I finally said, I'm going to go and I'm going to shoot this, because it was this old oak tree that it was long gone, long dead, but all the bark had fallen off, and it was just this white tree in the middle of this field. And I went out, I set up, and I wanted to get Polaris right in the center of the tree, and then have star trails kind of streak around it to make a circle. And on the last image, I took a flashlight and I painted the tree in, and it was pretty easy to do. It's a white, bare wood tree, so it's going to reflect the light really well. And I put the image together. It was one of my favorite images. This was probably 10, 15 years ago now. But light painting is a lot of fun under night skies. And another thing I like to do is, if you can find like old abandoned buildings, like a small shed or really any type of structure, you can take a flashlight or those little cube lights that you could buy on Amazon for, they're fairly cheap now, but you can buy those little cube lights, and you can say throw it in a little shed that is in the middle of this landscape, and you can illuminate the inside of that building and kind of give it that more ethereal, inviting, almost spooky look, but it adds a sense of intrigue to the image. It invites people to look at it longer than just, oh, cool, here's this abandoned shed or what have you. It's, hey, here's this abandoned building with a light on under the night sky. That kind of stuff, you can get really, really creative with that.
Yeah, and you can create a mood with just the color of light that you use. There's a park near where I live, and it's right by the Grand River, and they have this wonderful, it's just a little covered bridge. There's a small little tributary that goes into the Grand River, and it straddles that, but it sits right beside the Grand River. So I got up 4:35 a.m. and went down there, and I set up a flash with a radio slave, and I put an amber light on that flash and set it up inside the building, and then backed up, found the composition I wanted, and I waited and I waited and I waited until the sun was just starting to come up. And then I start shooting long exposures But then during that long exposure, I would fire that flash repeatedly until I got the balance that I wanted. And that I got a shot where the sun is just coming up and this warm light is starting to come across the Grand River. And a combination of that amber light inside that building just kind of washed all that inside of that building in warm light as well as the outside. And, so you can kind of play around with that kind of stuff. And it's very rewarding because the sky's the limit. I mean, you can come up with, the sky is literally the limit.
Yeah, I was just thinking that same thing to myself. I was like, literally, it's the limit. You can do anything because in astrophotography, when you're shooting at night, you have the ability to create light or, using artificial light, of course. And like you said, you can evoke different emotions. You can put a different spin on a location that to some maybe, yeah, sure, it's just a boring old barn or something. But using the right tools, the right lights, different gels, different effects, you can do some really powerful stuff.
Yeah, let your creative juices flow, those. And that's another part of being a photographer is being aware of where you're at. Everywhere I go, I'm looking for an opportunity. That's not always the best when I'm driving my wife, but I'm always looking for something, that old truck or that old tractor out in the field, or a barn, and that's all part of the game. It's like you're always looking for that image, that
you're always looking for subjects. Special.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. We've covered all kinds of different things from techniques to getting creative. When it comes to planning, preparing, we've talked a lot about weather conditions, how they have an effect, moon phases. Are there any particular apps or resources that you use to help you plan out your astrophotography adventures or your night sky adventures?
Yeah, typically I use the photographer's ephemeris. That kind of gives me, it's a lot like photo pills. That's another one that kind of tells you, at any given point in the day where the sun's going to be, where the moon's going to be, when the moon rises, moon set, all of that, moon phase. It covers all of that. So that's a great one for planning. Photo pills would be on the same level. Both of them, I think you're going to pay a little bit for that.
Yeah, I know Photo Pills is paid. I use Photo Pills and the photographer's ephemeris. I've used that, and they've been great resources. I will 100% agree that a lot of my astrophotography shots would not have been possible without those tools.
Yeah, and people will say, "Well, how did you know the moon was going to be there?" And I show them the app. You're kidding me. I didn't know there was an app for that. Oh, there's an app for everything. But there's another one that I have on my phone, and let me see real quick. It's called Stellarium.
Yes, that's a great one.
And there's a feature on that where you can pull up the night sky, and then you hit the little icon that looks like it's wiggling back and forth. And literally when you push that and you move your phone around, you can move it in a circle and it'll show you exactly what stars are visible in that little area. And that is just indispensable because, you can get to a spot and you think, well, I know the Milky Way is going to be visible in a little bit, but how long, and you can look at that app and you can see exactly where it's starting to come up above the horizon, and you think, okay, well, if I wait 45 minutes to an hour, it'll be right where I want it.
Right.
So what could be better than that?
Exactly. And it's those tools that make these images possible. One of the things that I really like with Photo Pills is the augmented reality feature, where if you're somewhere, it's daytime, you're scouting locations, which is something I definitely recommend people do. Don't just wander into places you've never been in the darkness. It's very dangerous. Much safer to be at least somewhat familiar with the locations you're going to be shooting. Get out there in the daytime and just scope it out. But one of the things I like to do when I'm actually doing that is I'll take my phone, open up Photo Pills, use that augmented reality feature, and then give myself a baseline idea of, well, at this time, the Milky Way is going to be in this position over here. What subjects can I include with it that are going to look really cool incorporated with the Milky Way? And it's just huge, just such a great resource, because back to that planning piece, that you kind of build this image in your head, if you will. With that tool, you can actually see or have somewhat of an idea of what the final image is going to look like before you even actually take it. And that's awesome.
Yeah. It's all in the planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Astrophotography is all planning. A lot. Well, 90% of it, I would say, is planning.
Yeah. Yeah. You can stumble on a photograph, and I don't want to discount anything, but planning will get you a lot farther.
Yes.
Planning ahead,
Yep. And another great app that I use myself is actually called Planet Pro. And
I haven't heard of that.
It's a wonderful resource, especially it's a lot better for people who might be using star trackers or wanting to shoot deep sky objects. I use it to find Orion and see what it's going to line up on. You can put just about anything into that app. The Milky Way, specific stars, comets, the moon, different constellations, different nebula. And in the same way, you can see where things are going to rise and set using Photo Pills or one of the, any other resource we discussed. It does the same thing, but it focuses on that star, that planet, that nebula, and it helps you build that idea of, okay, it's going to be here at this time, at this angle, at this elevation. What can I do on my end to build a scene with that?
Yeah, it's like it goes back to composition. It's like, yeah, you can take a beautiful photograph of the Milky Way, but it's a lot more interesting if you put something cool in front of it, a cactus or a barn or, a mountain range, or, it tells more of a story.
Exactly. And that's one of the big things that I've always noticed in really powerful astro images. It's the best images are your standard landscape. You have a well-defined subject, just as if you were shooting it with a brilliant sunrise or a brilliant sunset. But instead of all those colorful clouds in the sky and whatnot, now you've got the Milky Way. And to an extent, the Milky Way could be the subject, but the best images, in my opinion, at least, are when the Milky Way or whatever you're including in the scene, as far as astronomical targets go, is complementing the greater scene. It's complementing that subject in a way that tells its story. It's a piece of the story instead of the story itself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well stated. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy that you brought that up. The choosing subjects and knowing what to include and how to include it, because that's so big in astrophotography.
It just lends so much more to your composition. It adds another layer. It adds more depth to a two-dimensional image. But can make the difference.
It really does. Before we close it out here, of all your travels throughout Michigan, all the different places you've gone to, what are a couple of your favorite places that are relatively safe, easy to access, that people that are interested in astrophotography could go and check out and get some practice in?
One that's really a go-to for me is for like Aurora is in Ludington on the south side. There's a pier, Fisherman's Pier, and that's a great place because you're looking directly north, and that's where you want to be for Aurora. So that place is just like that's gold right there. As far as the Milky Way, I still love that shot I took in June with the Milky Way over the lighthouse at Mears. That was just like, I love that image. Now there's been times where I've shot the Milky Way over Big Red in Holland. But if you're a shooter and you're serious about shooting the night sky, you're going to have to seek out some information. You're going to have to figure out where the Milky Way is, when it rises, where it's headed, and then you can start to add in your foreground elements to really tell a story. Once you find those spots that make good foreground material, find out which way it's oriented or whatever, and then put yourself in the best place to go after that and take home that image.
Yep, that's well put. You need to not just understand where the Milky Way is going to be and when it's going to be there, but you have to have a plan as to what you're going to include with that and in what way you're going to build the scene, as if, like we just discussed, where whatever you're going to include, Milky Way, moonrise, what have you, there needs to be another element there, a subject, to help tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing too that I don't think we mentioned is just finding those dark skies, just getting out away from cities, or just getting to those places that don't have all that light pollution, and just taking it in, because I think that's one of the biggest things that for me, when I first started in astrophotography, I didn't know how to manage light pollution. I didn't know how to deal with it or overcome it. And it can really just wreak havoc on your final images if you don't know how to manage that, or if you don't know how to get to an area that's dark enough to where it's not really going to be a factor. So, and all those apps that we talked about, I know I believe PhotoPills has a dark sky map. But I'll include a couple other resources for finding dark skies in the show notes. For people that are interested in getting out there and giving this a try, they can use those resources.
Mm-hmm. The sad part is that those dark sky places are getting smaller and smaller.
They really are.
It's getting harder and harder. If you're like me, there's times where I'm out shooting at night and I think, what did the Native Americans think? They were here before, all of this, the city lights and everything else. And they must have stood out and looked up at the same sky. And I wonder what they thought. They saw it in their purest form. And I'm sure that as time goes by, we're seeing it in a purer form than people, 1,000 years from now. But it's just, that's always in the back of my head. It's like when I go to a spot, I think, man, I wonder what Native Americans thought when they were standing in this spot.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that I've frequently thought about too. What what the sky looked like 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and how incredible it must have been. When you get to skies that are dark enough, truly dark skies, you can look up and the Milky Way is visible with the naked eye. You could see it as the silvery band running through the middle of the sky, and it's life-changing. Once you see it without the assistance of a camera, without having to, take a however many second exposure, you can just walk right outside of your tent or what have you, get out of the car and look up and it's there. That's really something.
And it's amazing when there's no light, when your eyes adjust to the dark, how much you can actually see. Walter and I were up one time. It was Peterson Park, and it's south of the Grand Traverse Lighthouse. And it's not a dark sky park or anything like that, but it's out a ways, and it just so happened we were shooting up in that area, and then we came back, let's go check out the Milky Way. So we went down on the beach, and we're walking along the shore, and it's overgrown and it's dark, and you look up, and sure enough, you can see the International Space Station streaking across the sky. You think, how amazing, there's people up there floating, flying over us way up in space, or if you see a shooting star, it's just amazing. And kind of fun, on a funny note, we're walking and it's all like these trees overgrowing the shoreline. And as we're walking, it's like we're brushing this stuff off and it's just falling on us. And we finally turn a light on, and everywhere it was spiders.
Oh, no.
I don't know if it was their mating season or what. They were in the trees. When you would shine a light down on the ground, on the shore, it was all like it was bubbling. There was that many spiders, and they're crawling us. They're going down our necks, and it's just, I've never seen so many spiders in one place. And it's like, if I hadn't turned the light on, I probably would have been in better shape. But it's like that was kind of freaky. But in the end, we toughed it out and got some images of the Milky Way.
Yeah. I've had a couple instances like that where you're in the middle of a prairie or something, and you're wrapping up. You turn your light from red to white, so your eyes can readjust to white light, and all of a sudden you see all these little speckles in the grass, and you're like, what? Like, it's not dew. What is this? And then you realize all those little reflections in the grass are spiders, and they're just hanging out, waiting to, catch their meal. And it's like, okay, well, little freaky, but as long as you guys are cool with me, I'm cool with you. So
yeah. You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone.
Exactly.
Get on with your business.
Yep. Well, I certainly want to say thank you for sharing your experiences and joining me for an episode. This has just been awesome. Great discussion. And I wanted to put it out there for everybody. How can people find you, look at your work, find your prints, and get connected with you?
Yeah, I'm on social media, on Facebook, David Behrens Photography. I have 2 different Facebook accounts. I'm on Instagram, David Wayne Behrens. I don't have a website. I don't sell prints. I know that's probably kind of strange to a lot of photographers. And that goes back all the way to when I did this for a living as a wedding photographer. I had enough of the sales part of it. I do this just because I love making images. Plain and simple, just break it all down. I just love making good images. And if people want to sell their stuff, that's great, have at it. But I had enough of it with in my past that I am very guarded on what I do. I have people that will request prints, and I have fulfilled that. but I don't do that to make money. I'll do it as a courtesy, but yeah.
I definitely understand that. And I'll include links to all of your social media accounts in the show notes as well, so that people can go and check out your work and find you and, follow along with your journey here in the Great Lakes with astrophotography and the different adventures that you're going on. But again, huge thank you for joining. It's been a great discussion. Really enjoyed hearing about your experiences and everything here under the night skies in the Great Lakes.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. And it was an honor for me to be here, and you've been a wonderful host. And then I would like to shout out to thank Neil Weaver for giving you my name. That was a huge honor. Walter Elliott, my compadre, my partner in crime most of the time. It's always a joy shooting with him. And I hope someday that we can meet out in the field sometime and just meet in person and maybe shoot sometime. That would be fun for me.
Yeah, 100%. I'd love to do that. And I was actually talking with Walter about the same. I was like, hey, you know what? We should all meet up sometime this spring and just go shoot somewhere, go have fun, do whatever, just get out and get some time behind the camera and, have one of those photographer adventures that lead to these great stories.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to have fun doing it.
Oh yeah.
Photography should be a joy. It should be a pleasure. We're not out, we don't want it to be a drudgery or, whatever. So, you got to have fun doing it.
Yeah. It's got to be a labor of love.
Exactly.
Thank you all for enjoying this episode of the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. And another huge thank you to David Behrens for joining us on this episode. His work is linked in the show notes below. Head over there, give him a follow, say hello. Don't forget to share the love and support of other photographers here in the Great Lakes region. Please don't forget to rate and subscribe, share with your friends and fellow photographers, and continue growing this incredible community right here in the Great Lakes. See you guys on the next one. Take care, everybody.